I'm extremely proud of my son, Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Welcome to our deep dive on, well, this is going to be interesting, the controversy around President Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter.
It's quite the story.
It is. And, you wanted to understand it, so we've got all sorts of news clips and expert commentary. And
a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, but let's just start, for anyone who's maybe just tuning in. What happened with Hunter Biden?
Well, he was convicted for tax crimes and then unlawful possession of a firearm.
So pretty serious stuff.
Yes. But then President Biden, despite previously saying he wouldn't, issued this sweeping pardon.
Sweeping a how? Like, what do you mean?
It covers 10 years.
Whoa.
And potential offenses, not just the ones he was actually convicted of.
So beyond just those tax and gun things.
Exactly. It's being compared to Ford pardoning Nixon.
Wow. And this is causing a stir, right, like across the board.
Huge debate across the political spectrum.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Why did Biden say he pardoned Hunter?
Well, he's claiming that Hunter was targeted specifically because of his last name.
Okay, so kind of like guilt by association.
Right. And he says the prosecution was basically politically motivated.
Politically motivated?
In his statement, he actually says that the charges against his son came about after several of his political opponents in Congress pushed for them, specifically to try and hurt him and his election campaign.
So basically using his son as a political pawn is what he's suggesting.
Pretty much. He's saying that anybody who looked at the facts of Hunter's cases impartially, they would conclude that he was only targeted because he's his son, which he believes is, unfair.
Unjust.
Exactly. But, of course, not everyone agrees with President Biden.
Right.
Even some Democrats.
I was going to say, because, haven't there been some Democrats who have kind of come out against this pardon?
Oh, yeah. You have someone like Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton, for instance, who, while expressing his respect for the president, still disagrees.
With the pardon.
Right. Stanton is saying that this prosecution wasn't politically motivated. And he's emphasizing that Hunter did commit felonies. He was convicted by a jury.
Okay.
And Stanton thinks this sets a really bad precedent.
A bad precedent.
Yep.
And this is interesting because this whole pardon seems kind of like a big turnaround for President Biden, right?
Yeah.
Given what he'd said before about these sorts of things.
It is, because remember, he'd been very public, very outspoken about not interfering with Justice Department decisions.
Like, specifically, what did he say?
There are recordings of him saying things like, is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son? No. And have you ruled out a pardon for your son? Yes.
And this flip-flop is causing some, well,
a lot of anger.
Yeah.
A lot of cynicism.
People are feeling betrayed.
You have Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman, huge critic of Trump, who said, so the next time any of us complain about anything Trump does, this pardon is just deflating. Nobody's above the law. We've been screaming. Joe Biden just made clear his son Hunter is above the law.
Wow. That's a pretty scathing indictment.
It reflects a broader worry that the Justice Department is just becoming increasingly politicized, regardless of who's in power.
And so this just adds more fuel to the fire.
Yeah. I mean, Democratic Governor Jared Polis of Colorado even tweeted that this sets a terrible precedent. He said, a bad precedent that could be abused by later presidents and will sadly tarnish his reputation.
His reputation being President Biden's.
Yes. So, you see, even within the Democratic Party, there are concerns about the long-term consequences of this pardon.
And for them, it's especially problematic, right? Because this hurts the whole, image of the Democrats as the party that that stands against, using government institutions for personal gain.
Absolutely. They're seeing this as potentially really damaging.
It kind of reinforces the idea that both parties are, ultimately the same.
Yeah, they'll both bend the rules to protect their own.
But hold on. Haven't other presidents pardoned family members before? Like, didn't Trump pardon Jared Kushner's father?
He did, but
It's a Kushner.
the difference here is the sheer scope.
Okay.
This pardon covers 10 years of potential offenses. That's what's unusual.
So it's not just about pardoning for what he was convicted of, but potentially other things.
Right. It's much broader.
All right. So how are Republicans reacting to all this? Is this a moment where they're saying, I told you so?
Well, you have Republican strategist Brett Todd, who admits that many Republicans also believe the Justice Department is often used for political gain and to get attention from the media.
So it's not just a Democrat thing.
Right. He sees a lot of cynicism about this on both sides.
Okay, cynicism.
Yeah.
And Todd also said that this might actually backfire on the Bidens.
He thinks it could.
How?
Because now Hunter Biden doesn't have those Fifth Amendment protections anymore.
Meaning he can't refuse to testify, right?
Exactly. He could be forced to testify about his business dealings, maybe even reveal stuff that could be damaging to others.
So instead of putting a stop to the investigations, this could actually start a whole new round of them.
It's definitely something to consider.
It's a bit ironic, right? Like, trying to protect him might end up exposing him even more.
Yeah. It's very unpredictable.
And this raises the question, was Biden really just trying to protect Hunter? Or was it more about, personal feelings rather than just politics?
Well, Megan Hayes, who used to work in the White House and knows the family well, has a really interesting take on this.
Okay.
She suggests that maybe this decision comes from a place of grief because, remember, Biden has already lost 2 children.
Oh.
And she believes that maybe he was afraid of Hunter facing even more, maybe even unfair prosecution under a future Trump administration.
So maybe it was driven by fear.
Potentially. It's important to remember that at the end of the day, presidents are still human. They have emotions. They have fears.
But even if he was acting out of concern for his son, does that excuse, putting his personal feelings above the law? Like, is that okay?
It's a really difficult question. And a lot of legal experts are worried about the justification for this pardon.
So even if we understand where Biden is coming from, there are still serious concerns about whether this was the right thing to do.
Exactly. It's such a tangled web of personal and political factors. It's hard to separate them.
It's a mess.
It is. And then you add another layer.
Which is?
There are questions about whether the prosecution itself was actually fair.
Okay, how so?
Several legal experts, some who were even former U.S. attorneys, have said they wouldn't have pursued charges in Hunter's cases if his last name wasn't Biden.
Because of his father.
Exactly. They think he was unfairly targeted because of his father's position.
So, even with the pardon being controversial, could it be that in this situation it was actually the right thing to do?
It's such a tough question. This case makes us think about some really big issues, like the balance of power, how personal loyalties clash with public duty, and whether the justice system can ever truly be free from political pressure.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how we view justice and accountability in a democracy.
And this pardon's put Hunter Biden back in the spotlight, hasn't it?
It has. And remember, this isn't his first brush with controversy.
Oh, right. There are those investigations into his business dealings in Ukraine and China.
Exactly. They caused quite a stir a few years ago.
And now with this pardon, some people are saying this might actually lead to even more investigations, not fewer.
That's the irony of this whole situation. Like we mentioned earlier, Brett Todd, that Republican strategist, he thinks it could backfire.
Because Hunter Biden doesn't have that Fifth Amendment protection anymore.
Right.
So he can't just refuse to testify anymore.
Exactly. He could be forced to testify, maybe even before Congress or a grand jury, about his business dealings, and who knows what could come out of that.
It could get pretty messy for both Hunter Biden and for his father.
Especially if they find something that implicates the president.
So this pardon, which was meant to protect Hunter, could end up hurting him and his father.
It's a very real possibility, which is why this whole situation is so unpredictable.
So it's a gamble. It could benefit Biden politically, or it could really hurt him.
Absolutely. It might please some of his supporters who think Hunter was unfairly targeted, but it could alienate those in the middle.
And probably just emboldens his opponents.
Definitely. They're already using this whole thing to attack him.
What about Trump? What's he had to say about all this?
Well, he hasn't wasted any time using this to his advantage.
I can imagine.
Accusing Biden of being a hypocrite, abusing his power, even compared it to, him potentially pardoning those involved in the January 6th insurrection.
Oh, wow. That's quite the comparison.
It is, and it just adds to the tension and the division. It seems like Biden can't do anything right in the eyes of at least one side or the other.
This whole situation feels different, though. It's so personal.
It is. It's hard to separate the politics from the family drama.
And that's what makes this whole story so interesting. It reminds us that even presidents are just people. They have the same emotions and weaknesses as everyone else.
They do.
But it also raises questions about, what is justice? What is accountability? What are the limits of presidential power?
It's a single piece of a much larger puzzle.
It is. It really reflects the state of our society today.
It does.
It makes you wonder if we can ever trust our institutions again. or if there's any way to bridge the political divide.
It's a huge challenge, but it's one we need to face if we want to protect our democracy.
Going back to the pardon itself, there's something I'm still not quite clear on.
Oh,
It's the scope. It covers a full decade.
right, which is unusual.
Yeah. Why pardon potential crimes that haven't even been investigated?
It does seem a bit preemptive, like he's trying to head off future prosecutions.
It makes you wonder, is there more going on here than we know about?
It's possible. Maybe there are investigations we don't know about,
Right.
or allegations that haven't been made public.
So this might not be the end of the story. It could just be the beginning of a new chapter. Well, this deep dive has definitely shed some light on the complexities of, presidential power, family ties, and how justice works or doesn't work in today's world.
It's definitely not a story with easy answers. It makes us question our assumptions about how our political system really works.
It also highlights the human side of things. These are real people with real emotions making decisions that have huge consequences.
And it will likely have far-reaching consequences for all of us as a nation.
As we try to make sense of all this, what do you think are the biggest takeaways from this story?
One thing that stands out to me is how much trust has eroded in our institutions.
Because
Well, this pardon, whether you agree with it or not, just feeds into the narrative that this system is rigged, that those in power don't have to play by the same rules.
and that the political divide just keeps getting worse.
Exactly. Each side is retreating into its own bubble, distrustful of the other.
There's a lot of disillusionment out there.
There is. People are tired of the constant scandals and partisan fighting.
It feels like a pivotal moment for our democracy.
It does. And it's not clear what the future holds.
But one thing is for sure, we need to talk about these things.
We do. We need to have open and honest conversations, even if they're difficult.
Because that's how we find common ground.
Exactly. That's how we find solutions that work for everyone.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's a captivating story, but also a bit unsettling.
It is. It definitely raises more questions than it answers.
That's usually the case with the most important stories.
It's true. The stories that force us to confront uncomfortable truths.
And this is definitely one of those stories. I think this will have repercussions for years to come.
It will. It'll influence future elections, legal decisions, how we talk about these things as a society.
It's a story that really reflects who we are as a nation.
And who we're becoming.
And it underscores how the decisions we make today shape our future.
Absolutely. So as we wrap this up, what are your final thoughts for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that this story isn't over. It's still unfolding.
Exactly. There are still so many unknowns, and I think it's up to each of us to engage with the story critically, to really think it through.
To listen to different perspectives, to look at the evidence, and to come to our own conclusions.
Exactly. That's how we fight misinformation. That's
Yeah.
how we make good decisions as citizens.
It's easy to get caught up in the emotion of it all, but we have a responsibility to think for ourselves.
We do. And that's really what the deep dive is all about. It's about giving you the tools to be more informed, to be more engaged citizens.
Because knowledge is power.
It is. And critical thinking is more important than ever.
Well, this has been quite the journey. We've explored the politics, the legal battles, the human drama.
It's a story with so many layers.
And it raises so many questions about fairness, accountability, and how power really works. Questions that will stay with us long after the headlines fade away.
They will. But it also reminds us how important it is to think critically.
And to have these tough conversations.
Exactly. And to keep searching for the truth, even when it's hard to find.
I think that's a great takeaway.
I do too. And remember, we all have a part to play. It's about, being active participants in our democracy.
Voting, speaking up, staying informed.
Exactly. Making our voices heard.
This story, it really highlights this feeling that, the rules are different for the powerful. For those with the right last name.
It's something a lot of people are concerned about.
It makes you wonder if everyday Americans feel like there's one system of justice for the elite and another for everyone else.
That perception, it's really corrosive.
It undermines the whole system.
It breeds cynicism.
So, going back to that central question, if presidents struggle with this, with trying to balance personal loyalty and their duty to uphold the law, can we ever really have a truly impartial justice system?
It's a really tough question.
It is.
I think it underscores the need for transparency, for accountability, for strong ethical standards, especially for those in positions of power.
So not just hoping people will do the right thing, but actually putting systems in place to prevent these kinds of conflicts of interest.
Exactly. Things like stricter financial disclosure rules, more independent oversight of, how prosecutions are decided.
A culture that prioritizes fairness over politics.
Right. Big changes.
Do you think they could actually make a difference?
They're not a magic bullet, but they could help. Even if it's just a step towards a more level playing field, it's about rebuilding trust, even if it's just bit by bit.
But let's be realistic. Politics will always play some role in our justice system, no matter what safeguards we put in place.
It probably will.
So as citizens, how do we navigate this? How do we make sense of cases like this one?
I think it comes down to being really critical of the information we consume.
Not just taking things at face value.
Right. Whether it's from politicians, the media, or even, from us. Dig deeper, look at the evidence, consider different perspectives.
So basically, we need to do our own deep dives.
Exactly. Engage with the material, question assumptions, form your own opinions.
Based on a real understanding of the facts.
That's the best way to fight back against misinformation and make informed decisions.
That's a great point. It's easy to get swept up in the emotions of these stories, but we have a responsibility to think critically.
We do. And that's really what the deep dive is all about.
Helping our listeners become more informed, more engaged citizens.
Because knowledge is power.
It is. And thinking for ourselves is more important now than ever.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been an incredible exploration of a story that's, well, to say the least. We've seen the politics at play, the legal arguments, the very human struggles at the heart of it all.
It's a story that raises some really fundamental questions about fairness, accountability, and, who really holds the power in our system.
Questions that we'll continue to grapple with long after this news cycle is over.
Definitely. But it also reminds us how important it is to keep those conversations going.
To keep thinking critically.
To keep searching for the truth, no matter how difficult it might be.
That's a powerful message.
I think so, too.
This story has been fascinating, but also unsettling.
It has.
It makes you think about the challenges our democracy faces, but it also underscores the importance of everything we've been talking about.
Absolutely. Critical thinking, open dialogue, a commitment to finding the truth, even when it's hard.
I think that's a great note to end on.
I agree.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring these issues, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation alive.
Don't be afraid to dig deep.
Until next time.